Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the improvement era from May 1932. And this article is entitled Greatness in Men by Bryant Hinckley, David O. McKay. I'm interested in why they didn't put Elder David O. McKay, because they put Superintendent George Albert Smith, but okay, whatever. At the time, he was an apostle, and later on he became president of the church. So there should be plenty of information left for us to find after the end of this article, because this article isn't going to even cover like half of the time he was an apostle, let alone president of the church. He was also president of the church for a long time. I want to say, let me just make a quick guess here. I think it was around 1950 to like 1970. It was something ridiculous like 20 years. So there's going to be a lot of information about this person, but I don't think this particular article is that long. So in case it's not terribly long, we will fact check ourselves afterwards. So there's a little quote at the beginning. It says, "It is fitting that David O. McKay, General Superintendent of Sunday Schools, which are organized upon every continent, and the apostle who encircled the globe, dedicating and blessing the various continents and missions, should be the member of the Council of the 12, to be treated in the special missionary number of the Improvement Era. In this article, President Hinckley presents a striking and inspiring picture of a truly great character." That's interesting. So they're emphasizing the missionary aspect of his life. I am not familiar enough with his life to know how many missions he went on or where he went or anything. What do I know about him? I mean, besides that he was president of the church, I know that he was a very tender-hearted person and that he really, really loved his wife. Emma Ray, I want to say, is her name. Anyways, I really think that this will be a fun one, especially since I don't know that much about his life. I think I may have heard some stories, but I can't remember exactly which ones belong to him. So let's find out. Great men are the noblest possession of any nation. David O. McKay is a leader. He has an indefinable, fascinating personal charm, which awakens friendship and secures at once a cheerful and gratuitous following. Tolerant, genial, and sincere, he maintains without offense the high standards of his own life, and wins the confidence of others. He has, in happy combination, the fundamental characteristics which underlie successful leadership. The world owes its progress in civilization and character building more to leadership than to any other single factor, and when this is applied to young people, it becomes at once far-reaching and significant. He is preeminently a leader of young people. The quality of leadership which is symbolized by the lash never reaches the sources from which springs the highest and finest allegiance. It never commands the generous response which is awakened by an appeal to the higher and finer emotions of the soul. David O. McKay is a technician in making this higher and finer appeal. Also, I forgot to show this picture. So this is a picture of him when he was fairly young, it looks like. I feel like most pictures I have seen of him, he was significantly older, so makes sense, though, since this was in 1932 and he died in like 1970. So, his splendid courage, his strong and flexible intellect, his idealism, his kind but chivalrous attitude toward the humblest combined to give him that magic power which calls forth the best there is in one. It is stimulating to meet him. You go from his presence feeling a little finer, a little better than you were. David O. McKay is an educator by nature and training. He would be an outstanding personality in any company, but he is at his best before a group of young people. We do not know his superior in this capacity. That is a very strangely worded sentence. We do not know his I think they mean superiority. Yeah? Superior is an adjective. It doesn't belong there. It should be a noun. Yeah? We do not know his superiority in this capacity. He received his preliminary training in the public schools of his native town and in the Weber Stake Academy. He was graduated from the University of Utah in 1897 and was president of the graduating class of that year. Okay, good for him. Before attending the university, he taught in the school at Huntsville, and after graduating, became the principal of that school. Okay, so he's a teacher / principal. Yeah, that's kind of cool. On returning from a mission to Scotland, he was employed as the teacher in the Weber Academy, and 3 years thereafter became its principal, which position he held at the time he was called to the apostleship. Okay, there you go. Okay, there's a few pictures. Here is one. Close to nature, Brother McKay, his wife and son. Okay, cute, cute. His son doesn't really look that excited to be there, but okay. And then this is his wife, Emma Ray Riggs McKay. Yeah, he called her Ray, I believe. And he really loved her middle name for whatever reason. Whatever. It's pretty. It's a pretty name. All right, and then this is Elder McKay and the late Hugh J. Cannon in Egypt. And I don't know what they were doing there, but okay. I haven't talked about Hugh J. Cannon. Maybe I should look him up. I think he was in the Sunday School General Presidency, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll look it up later. Those days in the Weber Academy were indeed happy days for him and for all those about him. He had discovered himself, found his place, and was doing his work. Scores of boys and girls now grown to manhood and womanhood rise up and bless his name. He was a young man, but he was a great social and spiritual force. His students and his faculty caught the contagion of his radiant soul. From the blazing altar of his own heart, he kindled the love for truth in the hearts of his associates. That is real teaching, teaching at its best. In those days, the buildings were altogether inadequate, the libraries small, the laboratories limited, but in those humble surroundings there was created a lofty idealism. Under his leadership there was developed an educational atmosphere, and in such an atmosphere men and women grow. In April 1906 he was chosen to be an apostle. In 1908 he was made president of the Board of Education of the Weber Normal College, and in 1919 he was appointed Commissioner of Education for the church schools. This, in large outline, is the record of his educational activities, but it is only a small indication of his educational achievements. And it sounds like it. People follow him because of the admiration which they hold for him. The world always stands in need of this kind of leadership. It carries with it the quality which marks the real educator, for the best things in education and in character building cannot be taught. They must be caught. They leap from soul to soul like electricity from the dynamo. In addition to this, he is a good organizer, an effective disciplinarian, a superior judge of men. This, with his training and experience, has secured for him a prominent place in the great field of education. Right, there's another picture, Mrs. McKay and 3 of her children. I do not know how many children he had. I will look it up. His parents were devotees of education. His father, David McKay, of Scotch descent, was one of the strong men of his day, a pioneer in many fields and leader in his community. He served for 20 years as bishop of the ward in which he resided and was also active in civil and educational affairs, representing the people of his district in the territorial legislature prior to statehood, and for 3 terms in the state senate. He was one of the original founders of the Weber College, a man of great kindness and of strong individualism. So this was his father, yes? It's not David O., but rather David McKay. Yeah. Against current opinion, he maintained that girls should be given the advantages of a college training, attaching equal, if not more, importance to their education than the education of boys. He did this because the training of the next generation is committed largely into the hands of mothers, and because they have fewer opportunities for cultural contact. He felt that a college training for girls would go far towards solving this. David O. McKay's mother, Jeanette Evans McKay, of Welsh descent, was a woman of native culture and delicate sensibilities who imbued her children with a love of learning. Her influence in the home has found expression in the lives of the splendid men and women who grew up in it. There is an almost regal dignity about the children of this family. They received superior inheritances from both of their parents. However, their refined taste and lofty self-respect seemed to be a direct inheritance from their mother. Nice. Denied the advantages of a liberal education, she felt keenly its worth and fostered by every means at her command this desire in her children. She always dressed with scrupulous care and presided in her home with dignity. Well, that's sweet. She's like, I wasn't allowed to go to college, but I want you to. Yeah? It was a generational thing. Of course she didn't. I mean, I would have been surprised if she had. But, you know, I mean, they married, what did they say, 1897? Like, yeah. I'm not surprised that she didn't go to college. Referring to his mother, David O. McKay said, "I cannot think of a womanly virtue that my mother did not possess. Undoubtedly many a youth, in affectionate appreciation of his mother's love and unselfish devotion, can pay his mother the same tribute. But I say this in the maturity of manhood, when calm judgment should weigh facts dispassionately. To her children and all others who knew her well, she was beautiful and dignified. Though high-spirited, she was even-tempered and self-possessed. Her dark brown eyes immediately expressed any rising emotion, which, however, she always held under perfect control. In the management of her household she was frugal, yet surprisingly generous, as was father also, in providing for the welfare and education of his children. To make home the most pleasant place in the world for her husband and children was her constant aim, which she achieved naturally and supremely. Though unselfishly devoted to her family, yet she tactfully taught each one to reciprocate in little acts of service. Her soul, to quote the words of the poet, was as pure as the lines of green that streak the first white of the snowdrop's inner leaves." That's interesting. It's a strange, way to say it, because most people think of pure as white, something white, but in this case, pure as green. You're as pure as green. Okay. In tenderness, watchful care, loving patience, loyalty to home and to right, she seemed to me in boyhood, and she seems to me now, after all these years, to have been supreme. Mother left us when she was still young, only 54. During the intervening 27 years, I've often wished that I had told her in my young manhood that my love for her and the realization of her love and of her confidence gave me power more than once during the fiery youth to keep my name untarnished and my soul from clay. From my beautiful, ever-devoted and watchful mother, from my loyal sisters in our early home associations, and from my beloved wife during the maturer years that followed, I have received my high ideals of womanhood. No man has had inspiration from nobler, more loving women. To them I owe a debt of eternal gratitude." Well, that is really sweet. I love how much he loved his mother. Yeah, David O. is the eldest of his. Oh, and I haven't showed this picture yet. I'm sorry. I didn't even really realize it was there. So, Signals, the boys of the first U of U football team. I'm assuming he's among them. I couldn't pick him out, to be honest. Interesting. Class of 94. There you go. All right, continued on page 443. So, let's go down to page 443. See, and that they're winding up already is kind of surprising as well. All right, continued from page 391. Okay, father's children, and the idol of them all. His influence in the family has been a great factor. He has made a lasting contribution to the Sunday school cause. No history of the church hereafter will be written that will not exalt him to a high place because of his work. In 1899, he became a member of the Weber Stake Sunday School Board, with Thomas B. Evans as stake superintendent. This was a significant event, for Thomas B. Evans was an unusual man. His executive ability, his discipline, and the quality of his leadership won for him church-wide recognition and placed him among the foremost leaders in the great Sunday school organization. David O. McKay worked in this capacity for 6 years and then became second assistant to President Joseph F. Smith, who at that time was general superintendent of the Sunday schools, and 3 years later became first assistant to President Smith, and in 1918 he was appointed general superintendent, which position he holds at the present time. Yeah, there was a time when the superintendent of the young men and of the Sunday school were apostles themselves. It wasn't always the case. It kind of came and went. But yeah, there were definitely times when that was the case, in which it was at the time of this article. Thus, for many years, he has been the directing spirit in this organization, and it has moved majestically forward under his leadership. The personnel of his present board reflects credit on his judgment of men. In the Weber Stake, he introduced features which were destined to find their way into all the Sunday schools of the church, and which resulted in revolutionizing the teaching throughout the entire organization. For the first time, outlines were prepared. For the first time? Wow! Preparation meetings held, and the lesson work unified made progressive. For the first time? Like, they didn't have any outlines until then? They're like, don't just teach whatever. Okay. Sunday school work has never been done more efficiently and effectively than it was done in the Weber Stake under the direction of Thomas B. Evans, Charles J. Ross, and David O. McKay. This work appeals to the best and the finest that is in Superintendent McKay. He has brought to it not only an undivided heart, but the strength and devotion of all his splendid powers. He has put into the organization, the program, and the leadership of the Sunday schools, a part of the sublime and attractive faith so manifest in his own life. Through the Sunday school, he has fostered two major objectives of the church: the development of faith and the building of character. The Sunday school work is the pride of his heart, and he has left forever upon it the impress of his shining personality. He was ordained an apostle under the hands of President Joseph F. Smith on April 8, 1906. He has been the most valiant servant, adding dignity and luster to that great quorum. 59 years ago, September 8th, he was born in Huntsville, Weber County, Utah, and grew to manhood on a farm. His early surroundings were of the most wholesome character. His home life was, in all fundamental respects, ideal, and his contacts contributed to the building of a sound, sweet, and harmonious life. No wonder David O. McKay loves the great outdoors. In his boyhood, he imbibed the freshness, the delight, and the inspiration that comes from direct contact with nature, free and unspoiled. Love of freedom, boldness of spirit, force of character are the knightly virtues which have marked the people reared in the mountains. The native beauty and sublimity of his early surroundings must have found a happy response in his honest heart, and awakened in his stainless soul the high ideals which have been so manifest in his life. On the farm he learned to ride, to swim, to fish, and to enjoy the manly sports which robust youth so much craves. As a boy he played and played hard, and, let us remember, the instinct to play is as deep and precious as the instinct to prey. At the same time he did his full measure of honest toil. On a farm that means long days of hard work, work which usually finds one at the day's end tired but satisfied. It brings the fatigue that makes sleep sweet to a boy. Homes such as this have contributed generously to the manhood and leadership of this republic. All down the ages, contact with the soil has been the source from which have come leaders. Civilization is more secure when it keeps close to nature. Let the boy on the farm be not too discontented, for it is a good place to grow up. It is the source from which strong men have come. To this day there is no recreation so satisfying to David O. McKay, no relaxation so complete as that which comes from a visit to the old homestead, of which he is joint owner. He loves animals and delights to care for them. His method in handling them is the method which he employs in handling boys. He treats them with kindness, and they respond. This Huntsville farm is located in a picturesque and delightful little valley, high in the mountain tops and still easy of access. In his youth he played baseball, football, and other games with the same wholesome zest that he now plays the great game of life. Football was introduced in the University of Utah while he was a student there, and he played right guard on the original team. Interesting. So the very first one, yeah? The men on that team are today recognized as the leading citizens of the state. Like there's some inherently character building task of playing football. I don't know, I just think it's funny. 31 years ago, January last, he married Emma Ray Riggs, daughter of O.H. Riggs and Emma Robbins of Salt Lake City. She is a graduate of the University of Utah. Interesting, and now the mother of 7 brilliant children. That's interesting. So I was wrong before. I thought you were talking about his wife, but they were talking about his mother, who wanted everyone to get an education because she wasn't allowed to get one. And interesting that he married a woman who had been a college graduate. She must have been one of the first women to graduate in that college. I mean, maybe not the first, but probably in the group of some of the first ones. That was not common in the day. And the mother of 7 brilliant children, so 7 children. David Lawrence, Llewellyn Riggs, Louise Jeanette, Royal Riggs, deceased, Emma Ray, Edward Riggs, and Robert Riggs McKay. So they have 6 living children. Wow. I mean, at the time of writing this, okay, I'm sure that they're no longer around today because it's been a very long time since then. Sister McKay is an ideal wife, a wise and loving mother, greatly devoted to her husband, aiding and inspiring him in all his work. His enforced absence from home leaves largely the responsibility of directing the family and rearing the children upon her. She has met this responsibility cheerfully, courageously, and successfully. David O. McKay and his wife Emma Ray McKay know how to make a home and a refuge and a shrine. One of the interesting and historic events of the church was the world tour which David O. McKay and Hugh J. Cannon made in 1921-22. They visited officially all the missions of the church outside of the United States. To make this journey required 13 months in time. I believe it. All of them? I wonder how many there were. and 62,500 miles of travel. Jeez. They were 5 months upon the water and sailed on every ocean on the globe, crossing the equator 3 times. In the distance covered, in the lands visited, in the variety of people met, in the ocean calms throughout which they sailed, the fury of the storms through which they passed, the tranquillities and luxuries, the hazards and hardships which were a part of it, were combined the elements of a memorable journey, but its deepest significance was religion. Wow. That's quite a feat, and I'm sure we'll read about that when we read more about his whole life. Elder McKay was the first man bearing the apostolic power to visit many of these missions. This visit will never be forgotten. It will be handed down to coming generations by means of monuments and inscriptions, recorded history, and traditions. The inspiration of their calling rested in mighty power upon him and his companion. Experiences of the most sacred and convincing character were given, showing divine approval of their work. The limits of this article are such that we can only mention, without detail or comment, an event or two of that memorable journey. In Hawaii, a prayer was offered on the spot where George Buchanan, as a boy missionary 80 years before, had prayed, and received a divine and marvelous manifestation. On this occasion, the same sacred influence was experienced. The very presence of personages from the spirit world was felt. The farewell which was given by the visitors by the saints of Samoa will remain forever as one of the sublimest and sweetest memories of all who witnessed it. The spot where Elder McKay offered his final prayer on behalf of that people is today marked by an appropriate monument. The Hui Tau, held in their honor by the saints of New Zealand, the dedication of the land of China for the preaching of the gospel, their visit to the Holy Land, were all events of major significance. Fortunately, detailed accounts in printed form of these events are available. Cool. David O. McKay has a deep and clear understanding of the priesthood and its functions as a broad vision of its possibilities. The recent progress of this work, which is of such basic significance in the development of the Church, owes much to the genius and devotion of David O. McKay. It has an absorbing and transcendent interest to him, and this must mean much to it, for he works with the zeal and spirit of a crusader at anything which claims his interest. He has been instrumental in introducing some measures of practical and far-reaching value in this work. Every meritorious cause can rely upon him for his loyal support. He was delegate to the White House Convention on Child Health and Protection, really, and is chairman of that organization of the state of Utah. This movement will feel the quickening touch of his strong and radiant personality. In August 1897, he was set apart for a mission to Great Britain, returning in September 1899 to take up his work in the Weber Stake Academy. During a large part of this mission, he presided over the Scottish Conference. Yeah, he has Scottish ancestry, yeah? McKay. It sounds pretty Scottish to me. From November 1922 to December 1924, he presided over the European mission. Wow, a lot of them did, didn't they? It may be said with modesty that as a missionary, as conference president, and as president of the mission, he was eminently successful. He has the rare quality of winning the confidence of people, and this is the first step toward conversion. Yeah, you have to trust the person who's talking to you, yeah? On returning home, he was instrumental in establishing the mission home in Salt Lake City, where young men and women receive brief but intensive training prior to leaving for their missions. The religion of the Latter-day Saints is the deep and dominant force in his life. He understands it and knows how to interpret it. The religion which David O. McKay preaches and practices is a cheerful one, encouraging everything that makes life rich and full and effective, cultivating in every way the romance and gladness that comes from abundant living. It is not a straitjacket, it is not a killjoy, there is nothing forbidding in its aspects, nothing inhibited by it that would contribute to one's permanent peace and happiness. It discourages only those things which would abridge one's usefulness and curtail his righteous possibilities. Okay, now what is the source of his influence, the secret of his superior leadership? Put this question to his most intimate friends and they will answer. His love for mankind, his humanness. He has a luminous and impressionable mind, a will of the strongest fiber, a great and tender heart. He is a clear and graceful writer, an appealing and convincing speaker, a delightful companion, a chivalrous leader, a lovable man who holds forever your confidence. You trust him, and you believe in him. His loyalty is superb. He never forsakes a friend, and is big enough to love the sinner while he hates the sin. This gives him a lifting power that comes only to noble souls. He has a really great heart, a deep and abiding sympathy, a passionate love for the souls of men. all qualities which the world stands so much in need of. Another secret of his success is his sweet and unimpeachable character. He lives above the fog and turmoil of daily circumstance. David O. McKay never did a mean or little thing. He is guilty of no injustice to his fellows. He is free from the indictments of selfishness and trickery. All his days he has lived upon a high moral plateau and has risen to spiritual altitudes which few people reach, inspiring all the while those about him to climb to the same heights. David O. McKay has done many good things and has said many beautiful things, but somehow he is finer than anything he has ever said or done. Back of all his splendid deeds, rising above all his achievements, is the charm of his winsome personality. Dignified and handsome in appearance, congenial and gracious in manner, kind, sincere, genuine, and peace-loving, but when necessity requires, courageous in action, fearless in defense of right, brave in the hour of battle, gentle and sympathetic in times of trouble, strong for truth, justice, purity, and righteousness. He is always and everywhere a gentleman. Whew, that was kind of a long article. So, thank you, Bryant S. Hinckley, for your commentary. It sounds like, like he was a really good, he was a really good person. But as I have mentioned, this only covers like half of his life. So, we're going to skip over to the Wikipedia article. I will repeat myself again. I use Wikipedia as a second source. Since I just read a first source, this is my second source to fact check a few things. This is a YouTube video. This is not a paper I'm writing, okay? I consider this source adequate to fact check a YouTube video, okay? So, anyways, so let's take a look at the Wikipedia article. I think I'm just going to go ahead and read it, the whole thing, because even though we just read an article about him, it was such a small amount of his life compared to how long he lived that I think it would be most helpful to read the whole thing, yeah? All right, David Oman McKay, born September 8th, 1873 to January 18th, 1970. Wow, he lived almost 100. Crazy. Okay, so he lived until he was, what, 97? Or 96, I guess. 96 and a half. Crazy. Was an American religious leader and educator who served as the 9th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1951 until his death in 1970. Told you, it was almost 20 years. Ordained an apostle and member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1906. McKay was an active general authority for nearly 64 years, longer than anyone else in LDS history, I guess up till now, yeah. Elder G. Smith was a general authority for 66 years, but only actively served for 32 prior to his designation as emeritus. Fair, yeah? Yeah, because Elder G. Smith lived to something ridiculous, like 106. Like, he lived a really long time. I don't know of the exact number, but it was something like that. Anyway, it's not important. Okay, early life. The third child of David McKay and Jeanette Eveline Evans McKay, McKay was born on his father's farm in Huntsville, Utah Territory, about 10 miles or 16 kilometers east of Ogden. McKay's mother was a Welsh immigrant from Merthyr Tydfil. I actually know somebody from there. And his father was a Scottish immigrant from Caithness. See, I'm not as good at pronouncing Scottish because I haven't heard that one before. In 1880, after the death of McKay's two older sisters, Margaret and Elena, his father was called as a missionary to his native Scotland, where he proselytized for 2 years. In his father's absence, 7-year-old David had additional family responsibilities and helped his mother. Now think about that. Okay, they said he was the third child, yeah? And he had two older sisters, Margaret and Elena, and they both died just before his father was called on a mission. Like, that's crazy. So now he's suddenly the oldest child. Like, that must have been really strange and really difficult as well. Thinking he was only 7 years old, like, that's crazy. McKay's grandmother bequeathed $5,000 to McKay's mother upon her death and directed that every cent be used for the education of the children. This emphasis on education, yeah? This money allowed McKay, his brother Thomas, and his younger sisters, Jeanette and Annie, to attend the University of Utah. If I'm not mistaken, Thomas E. McKay, I believe, was also Sunday school superintendent, or possibly one of the counselors. I can't remember. Yeah, I'll double check in a little bit. And his younger sisters, Jeanette and Annie, to attend the University of Utah. McKay graduated in 1897 as valedictorian and class president. That's crazy. He was a good student, yeah? Immediately afterward, he was called on a mission to Great Britain. Like his father, he presided over the Scottish district of the church. Early in his mission, he was impressed by a motto that he saw inscribed on a building in Stirling. Whate'er thou art, act well thy part. This message became a source of inspiration throughout his life. I've heard that. Yeah, and it was literally written on a building. And I wonder who it was that was inspired to put that up, but it was very much an inspiration to David O. McKay, so I think that's cool. Career in education. Upon his return from Scotland in late 1899, McKay taught at the high school level at LDS Weber Stake Academy, predecessor of Weber State University. He married Emma Ray Riggs in the Salt Lake Temple in January 2, 1901. They eventually had 7 children, one dying as a young child. That was really common back then. I am sure that wasn't their fault. For his first 3 years at Weber, McKay taught mainly religion and literature classes. On April 17, 1902, McKay was appointed principal of Weber, succeeding the founding principal Louis F. Munch, who had resigned after 9 years in the position. One of his first actions as principal was to organize a school paper. He oversaw the inauguration of the sports program at Weber, with men's and women's basketball teams organized during McKay's tenure. In 1905, they won their basketball game against the University of Utah. I wonder why that was important to them. Like, remember, we won that one. Okay, calm down. In 1905, church apostles John W. Taylor and Matthias F. Cowley resigned from the Quorum of the 12 due to disagreement over the manifesto forbidding polygamy, and Apostle Marino W. Merrill died in early 1906. With 3 vacancies, George F. Richards, Orson F. Whitney, and McKay were called as apostles during the LDS Church's April 1906 General Conference. McKay was then 32 years of age. Can you imagine, like, an apostle being called today who was 32? You'd be like, oh, he's the next president. Well, not the next necessarily, but like he's going to be president of the church someday, you know? Well, I'm assuming how he lives long enough, but like, that's crazy. 32 years old. Prior to this appointment to full-time church service, McKay had planned on a career in education and educational administration. Yeah, principal, yeah. Teacher and principal. He stayed active in education even after his appointment, continuing as principal of the Weber Stake Academy until 1908. 2 years! Wow, replaced by Wilford M. McKendrick. I'll bet that was a challenge. McKay stayed at Weber Stake Academy to see the completion of new building projects that he had begun. He also served on the Weber School Boards of Trust until 1922, and the University of Utah's Board of Regents from 1921 to 1922. So that a long time, yeah, he stayed involved in the school. McKay enjoyed a long personal friendship with John F. Fitzpatrick, who published the Salt Lake Tribune from 1924 to 1960. They met weekly for breakfast to discuss the betterment of Utah. Interesting. Fitzpatrick organized the Newspaper Agency Corporation, a joint operating agreement between the Salt Lake Tribune, represented as the Kearns Corporation, and the church-owned Deseret News, and consulted extensively with McKay to form this mutually beneficial business in 1952. Okay. Interesting. I wonder what they did together. I mean, did they share news with each other to make sure that both of them were up to date? Or, like, why did they get together? You know, this Newspaper Agency Corporation, like, what did it do? I'm just curious. Interesting. That I found that very, very interesting. Maybe they did share news with each other. Member of the Quorum of the 12. In October 1906, McKay became an assistant to the superintendent of the Deseret Sunday School Union. At the time, Joseph S. Smith was both the church president and the superintendent of the Sunday School, so many of the actual duties of the Sunday School were performed by McKay. After Smith's death in November 1918, McKay became the Sunday School superintendent. In 1920, the first presidency assigned McKay to make a world tour of the LDS Church's missions with Hugh J. Cannon, who recorded the journey of some 61,646 miles. They did mention that one, yeah? They opened a new mission to China, traveled to Hawaii, where McKay had a vision promising to build a school near the temple, and visited Samoa, Tonga, New Zealand, and Palestine. It's interesting. They're like listing all these things around the Pacific Ocean, you know, China, Hawaii, Samoa, Tonga, New Zealand, and then let's just jump over to Palestine, which is completely on the other side of the world. Like, that's crazy. In Palestine, they met Wilfred Booth and visited Armenian Latter-day Saints. What were the Armenians doing there? Or maybe they visited Armenia. Is that what they're trying to say? McKay returned to Utah on Christmas Eve, 1921. That's crazy. From 1923 until 1925, McKay served as president of the church's European mission, headquartered in London, with the responsibility of all LDS church functions in the British Isles and supervision of mission presidents. In this position, McKay first used the slogan, "Every member a missionary," for outreach promotion. Really? They still use that? Wow, I didn't realize that dated back to him. The philosophy has since been taught as a general theme throughout the church. Yes, and it still is. Like, that's, wow. Okay. In 1934, McKay became second counselor to Heber J. Grant in the first presidency. He served in that capacity until Grant's death in May 1945, and when Grant was succeeded by George Albert Smith, McKay was called to continue as second counselor. Second counselor, first presidency, yeah? Yeah, okay. That makes sense, because then he went on to become president of the church, you know. I mean, it's interesting. Okay, influence on education. Within the leadership of the LDS Church, McKay focused on education. As general superintendent of the church's Sunday school organization from 1918 to 1934, McKay built seminaries near public high schools throughout Utah. Yeah, that was a big deal, yeah? Allowing students to take Latter-day Saint religious courses along with their secular high school education. McKay also transferred 3 LDS colleges to the state of Utah in the 1920s: Snow College, Weber State University, and Dixie College. Okay. Utah underfunded the institutions, and in 1953, the Governor J. Bracken Lee offered to give them back to the LDS Church. McKay, then president of the church, said he would accept them, and the proposal was placed on the 1954 election ballot. Since it failed to pass, the 3 institutions remained property of the state. Okay. I don't think it's that important, yeah? Like, you could or not, you know, whichever. McKay guided the remaining church school in Utah, Brigham Young University, into a full 4-year university. McKay was the 4th commissioner of church education in 1920 and 1921. So he must have had a lot to do with, like, the education system the way it is today. I mean, it sounds like he made a lot of changes that are still implemented today. That's crazy. In honor of his service, the BYU School of Education was named the McKay School of Education. WSU's School of Education also carries his name. Yeah, he was that influential. Weber State, yeah? Weber State and BYU both have their School of Education named after him. That's really cool. President of the LDS Church. Heber J. Grant chose McKay to serve as second counselor in the first presidency in 1934. They mentioned that already. He served in the presidency under Grant and then under George Albert Smith until 1951. In 1950, he also became president of the Quorum of the 12 when his predecessor, George F. Richards, died, making McKay the second most senior apostle after the church's president. He was set apart as president of the church on April 9, 1951, upon Smith's death. Oh, he died on the 4th, because I remember he died on his birthday, so this was less than a week later. Cool. He was 77 years old upon assuming the presidency and served for 19 years until his death. During this time, the number of members and stakes in the LDS Church nearly tripled. Wow! From 1.1 million to 2.8 million, and 184 to 500, respectively. Crazy. That's a huge leap. McKay was an outspoken critic of communism, opposing its perceived atheist underpinnings and denial of freedom of choice. Well, you're not wrong. Similarly, communist nations generally forbid proselytizing by the LDS Church and most other religions. Yeah, but that's not because of him, you know. I mean, they just do. In 1951, McKay began plans for what eventually became BYU Hawaii. Cool. In 1954, he made another trip around the world, visiting Brazil, South Africa, Fiji, Tonga, and other countries. Under McKay's administration, the LDS Church's stance on Africans holding the priesthood was softened. Yeah, but they still didn't have it, yeah. Beginning in the mid-1950s, members of suspected African descent no longer needed to prove their lineage was not African. allowing dark-skinned members to receive the priesthood unless it was proved that they were of African descent. Okay, well, that's a step in the right direction. It's not quite where you should have gone, but okay. I mean, that's better than what it was before, I guess. This policy improved proselytizing in racially mixed areas such as South America and South Africa. Blacks of verifiable African descent, including most in the United States, were not permitted to hold the priesthood until 8 years after McKay's death, and that was under Spencer W. Kimball. Beginning in 1961, the LDS Church spearheaded the priesthood correlation program. By the 1970s, all church organizations were placed under direct priesthood leadership. These organizations became known as auxiliary organizations. So that's the Sunday School, Young Men's, Young Women's, Relief Society, Primary. Yeah? Not necessarily in that order. In fact, that was the wrong order, but you get the idea. Film director Cecil B. DeMille consulted with McKay during the productions of his 1956 epic film The Ten Commandments. Really? Forming a friendship lasting until DeMille's death. McKay invited DeMille to BYU, where he delivered a commencement address in 1957. Really? Like, that is so interesting. I wonder why. I wonder what he consulted about as well. That's interesting. I'm sorry, that kind of threw me off. Like, well, really? McKay regularly traveled until he was in his 90s. His deteriorating health in the mid-1960s ultimately led to the appointment of 3 additional counselors in the first presidency, as existing members were increasingly infirm and often unable to preside at meetings. Yeah, that's basically why they call additional counselors, and it's still a thing that they did. I know that Gordon B. Hinckley was an additional counselor to Spencer W. Kimball. Yeah, and, you know, it can happen. And Brigham Young had several additional counselors, but part of that was the difficulties in communication of the time, I think, because you had to, like, physically go places, and he couldn't. So that's why he called counselors and gave them the authority to do perform tasks in other areas. Anyways, that's off topic, but yeah. But let's take a look at who were his counselors. Yeah. By 1968, the first presidency was composed of 6 members, larger than it had been at the death of Brigham Young in 1877. Shocking. Like, that's really, really big. McKay's counselors in the first presidency were Stephen L. Richards, first counselor from 1951 to 59. J. Reuben Clark, Jr., second counselor from 1951 to 59, first counselor from 1959 to 61. Henry D. Moyle, second counselor, 1959 to 1961, first counselor from 1961 to 1963. Hugh B. Brown, third counselor, 1961, second counselor, 1961 to 63, first counselor, 1963 to 70. N. Eldon Tanner, second counselor, 1963 to 70. Thorpe B. Isaacson, counselor, 1965 to 70. Joseph Fielding Smith, counselor, 1965 to 70, and Alvin R. Dyer, counselor, 1968 to 70. Yeah. Several of them were not members of the 12, including Thorpe B. Isaacson and Alvin R. Dyer. This is not unprecedented. We have already mentioned several people who also had that happen, that they were counselors in the first presidency without being a member of the Quorum of the 12. All right, moving on. Death. McKay died on January 18, 1970, at age 96, surrounded by most of his family. The cause of death was acute congestion. Acute congestion, like that means that that's like a sinus infection? Like, seriously? I'm really? Okay, I didn't know that could kill you, but apparently it caused breathing problems, I'm guessing? Interesting. He had lived longer than any previous leader of the church. Funeral services were held in the Salt Lake Tabernacle. Now that's no longer true, and it wasn't even true after his death, because I believe Joseph Fielding Smith lived longer than he did. But he didn't serve as long as he did. And today, well, when this comes out, we will be after the 100th birthday of our current president of the church. So he is solidly the longest living president of the church so far. Obviously, time has not ended, so it will continue to move on forward. And the reason I wasn't sounding sad about that is because when you live to 96, I personally don't feel like death is sad. But the article's not quite over. I'm going to skip the part about the headstones, but go to family ties. His younger brother, Thomas Evans McKay was a prominent missionary and mission leader for the LDS Church in Switzerland and Germany. He also served as an assistant to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles from 1941 to 1958. Oh, that's right. That's what it was. Oh, I thought he was like a Sunday school president, but no, he was an assistant to the 12. That's what it was. My bad. Sorry about that. McKay's niece, Fawn McKay Brodie, was the author of a controversial book, No Man Knows My History, a highly critical biography of Joseph Smith, the publication of which led to her eventual excommunication from the LDS Church. Really? Wow. Okay. Well, I haven't read it, so I don't know exactly what was in it that caused her to be excommunicated, but there you go. McKay's oldest son, David Lawrence McKay. Oh, I've heard that's okay. I think I'm getting my McKays mixed up. David Lawrence McKay was his son, yes? Yeah, the 8th General Superintendent of the LDS Church's Sunday School organization. Maybe I was getting him mixed up with Thomas E., his brother. Yeah, I think I was. So Thomas E. McKay, his brother, was an assistant to the 12, and David Lawrence McKay, his son, was the superintendent of the Sunday school. Yeah, that's what it was. When his father was ill, David often read his father's sermons during General Conference. Yeah, I remember that. One of McKay's granddaughters is Joyce McKay Bennett, wife of former United States Senator Bob Bennett. Another grandchild, Alan Ashton, was the co-founder and co-owner of computer program WordPerfect. Oh, that's a blast from the past. When was the last time we've used WordPerfect? Yeah, I use Microsoft Word, but I am sure WordPerfect... I remember using WordPerfect as a child. Like, it's been a long time, but yeah. The Events Center at Utah Valley University in Orem, then the David O. McKay Event Center, carried McKay's name between 1996 and 2010, after an anonymous donation was given in his honor. Cool. In 2010, the name was changed to Utah Community Credit Center due to a fundraising need at the university, and McKay's name was affixed to the university's Education Center instead, which I believe he would probably have preferred. So it's all good. Teachings. McKay was concerned with missionary work and coined the phrase, "every member a missionary," in order to encourage church members to become more engaged in that work and not just leave it to the full-time missionaries. McKay's statement that no other success can compensate for failure in the home is taught to LDS church members as an important principle. Yeah, and that's also still taught. Yeah, and also the phrase that he said, "where'er thou art, act well thy part." Yeah, that is also widely taught. McKay's teachings as an apostle were the 2005 course of study in the LDS Church's Sunday Relief Society Melchizedek priesthood classes led. That's kind of not important. It was because he was a president of the church. It was a series of books called Teachings of the Presidents of the Church. Yeah, which is really fantastic, by the way, if you really want to look it up. But, yeah, because he was a president of the church, he had one. Yeah, it was taught 2005. There you go. I don't consider that important, personally. Anyways, that was a lot of information. And he lived a very long life and did a lot of stuff. And I think that probably the most prominent thing you should take away as his personality and person was education. He loved education, and he loved teaching, and he loved helping people learn. And I think that all those buildings and things and organizations named after him were totally something he would have loved. And the fact that a lot of his teachings lived on till today really shows how universal they are, and that he changed a lot of policies to make them better. I mean, honestly, I think that that's great. I'm also going to quickly look up Hugh J. Cannon. I think I'm going to look on my own website. Anyways, so, because I can't remember what he did, I'm going to do a quick search. Hugh. Although I've heard of him, he's not on my website, which means he's not one of the leaders of the organizations, because that's who I have up there. So, I think I've seen him on... Oh, there's no page for him. Of course there's not. Wikipedia, you're letting me down. Okay, fine. I'll do a general Google search. Okay, on the Church History Biographical Database, they have something. So Hugh Jenna? I don't know. Cannon. I think it's Jenny? I don't know. I don't understand his middle name, but if you know this particular name, let me know how it's pronounced, because it's confusing. He was born 19 January 1870 and died 6 October 1931. Okay, that makes sense then, that why this article mentioned him as deceased, since it was printed in 1932. Okay. I'm gonna served in the Swiss and German mission at the age of 21, served in the German mission at the age of 31, called as president of the German mission at the age of 31, called as president of the Swiss and German mission at age 34, called as president of the Swiss and German mission at age 55, and then he died in Salt Lake at age 61. So, okay, he was a very prominent missionary, particularly in Germany, it looks like. Okay, well, that's who that is. And then I was going to look up the Sunday School General Presidency. So how about we look that up really quick. And I'll give you a couple of screenshots of the timeline. You don't need all of it. So when he was called to the Quorum of the 12, it was Joseph F. Smith, George Reynolds, and Joseph F. Tanner. And then after that, it was David O. McKay, starting in 1907. So it was shortly after he was called as a member of the Quorum of the 12. And then in 1909 to 1918, he served as first assistant superintendent. And then he was called as general superintendent in 1918. And he served there until 1934. So it was shortly after this article was written that we read. And then he was replaced by George D. Piper, who was his second counselor. All right. So yeah, I'll include a screenshot of the timeline that I have up here. So yeah, that was really interesting to me. I found a lot of that information really fascinating, and I think that like the main takeaway is how emphasized he was on education and Sunday school being part of their education, yeah, religion and literature as well. So I think that he would love all of the tributes that he has gotten, and that he is well known for teaching people correct principles and for loving his wife. You know, I mean, you think about all of the things that people could remember you for, and I think those are some really good ones. So I really enjoyed that, and I hope you did too. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.